World War II remains the most devastating war in human history. Numerous large cities were left crumbling after this conflict. Today, nearly all geopolitical events and international relations can be traced back to this war. You've heard many stories from World War II before, but in this video, let's understand World War II in complete depth from beginning to end. What happened exactly? Why did it happen? And what was its impact? This is the story of World War II. Let's begin this story in 1919, the year when World War I ended and the famous peace treaty was signed, the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty contained an important clause, Article 231, which held that Germany was to bear responsibility for all losses caused by World War I. This clause is also known as the War Guilt Clause because it essentially implied that regardless of other countries participating in the war, Germany was to be blamed entirely. France and Britain wanted Germany to pay heavy costs for losing the war. They wanted to recover their losses from Germany. As a result, according to the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was ordered to pay a fine of $33 billion to the other countries. In today's money, this amounts to around $270 billion. This was such a large amount that you won't believe it. Germany only made the final payment of this fine in 2010. It took almost 100 years. Where did this money come from? Obviously from Germany's citizens. The first payment was made by Germany in 1921, and right after that, hyperinflation struck Germany. Germany's currency back then was the German mark. You can't imagine how rapidly it was devalued. In 1922, in Berlin, a loaf of bread cost 160 marks. The following year, in 1923, the same loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Obviously, the economy was crippled, and the rate of unemployment rose rapidly. In such circumstances, Adolf Hitler entered our story, a young political leader who knew how to manipulate the masses with his speeches. In 1923, Hitler's Nazi party tried to overthrow the German government by staging a coup. Even though this attempt failed, it caused Hitler's popularity among the masses to increase manifold. Rumors were spread among the people that the embarrassment faced by Germany and the international humiliation were because of anti-national elements living in the country. People were distressed and it was easy to manipulate them. Hitler claimed that the Jews and socialists living in the country were to blame. They were the reason for Germany's disgrace. Over the next 10 years, propaganda was used abundantly, media organizations were paid off, and hate speeches were everywhere. In 1929 came the Great Depression. This worsened the already dire unemployment situation. By 1933, 6 million people were unemployed in Germany. Many people were homeless, children were starving to death. As a result, in 1933, Hitler declared himself the dictator of Germany. After taking over full control of the country, Hitler started working on making his dream of a German empire come true, the German Reich, a state that would be racially pure, with residents only from the Aryan race. There would be no space for Jews and Slavs. To fill people with hatred, they came up with the Judeo-Bolshevism conspiracy theory. According to this conspiracy theory, the Russian Revolution in 1917 was supposedly caused by the Jews, which eventually led to the formation of the Soviet Union. In 1935, the rest of the world discovered that Germany had an air force. This might not seem like a big deal, but the Treaty of Versailles had specifically laid down the condition that Germany could not have any form of military power. This was an open violation of the Treaty of Versailles by Hitler. By this point in time, many people in Britain believed that the contents of the Treaty of Versailles were very unfair to Germany. They were demanding such a large ransom that it crippled the country, and the country wasn't even allowed to have a military. Many considered it very demanding. In June 1935, Britain signed the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, which formally recognized that Hitler had the authority to form his navy. Germany could have an independent navy, but the growing militarization in Germany alerted France. France built a 450-kilometer-long fortification on its eastern border, named the Maginot Line. In 1938, when Hitler believed that his military was sufficiently prepared, he focused his attention on their neighbor Austria. Austria was a must-have country for Hitler. He wanted all German-speaking countries to unite as one nation. His ultimate goal was not only to conquer as many countries as possible to satisfy his pride, but also to acquire resources to advance his own country. The people Hitler believed to be racially superior, his Aryan race, he wanted to give them Lebensraum, or living space, so that they could live freely. In February 1938, Hitler met Austrian Chancellor Kurt Schuschnigg and forced him into signing an agreement. The agreement allowed Hitler to place pro-Nazi people in the Austrian government. The Austrian government was infiltrated by appointing his own people. Within a month, things were out of control. The Austrian Chancellor knew that if the infiltration was to be stopped, the people needed to be consulted first. Whether Austria should be an independent country or be united with the Nazis, he decided to hold a national vote. As soon as Hitler found out about the national vote, he took his army and marched into Austria. The German military entered Vienna, but the Austrian Chancellor wanted no bloodshed, so he resigned from his seat. Hitler used his propaganda ministry to spread fake news of riots happening in Vienna, claiming that communists were responsible for the riots and that the Austrian government had asked the German army to help protect Austria. The next day, the Austrian parliament was dissolved and Austria ceased to be an independent country. This invasion was successful without any bloodshed. A major reason for this was that at this point, many people in Austria were in Hitler's favor. They were victims of the propaganda and believed Hitler's invasion would help them become a superpower. After taking over Austria, Hitler moved on to the next country, Czechoslovakia. On Czechoslovakia's border, there was the region of Sudetenland. Of the people living there, around 3 million were Germans. Hitler used that as an excuse to claim that region as Germany's due to the Germans living there. Here, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain came into the picture. He wanted to avoid a war at all costs. He believed that if Hitler was given what he wanted, he would stay calm and there would be no wars. This is why, in September 1938, the Munich Agreement was signed.
That the settlement of the Czechoslovakian problem, which has now been achieved, is, in my view, only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace.
Under this agreement, the region of Sudetenland was to be given to Germany, but only if Hitler promised that there would be no more wars. Hitler gladly took this piece of Czechoslovakian land, but not even 1 year passed before he violated the Munich Agreement. In March 1939, Hitler took his army to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. People fought for the first time, but the German army won easily. The country was split into two. One part was included in German territory, and the second part was made a Nazi client state, a puppet government under the name of the Slovak Republic. British Prime Minister Chamberlain faced heavy criticism due to this. At this point in time, Winston Churchill famously said that Chamberlain had a choice between war and dishonor, chose dishonor, and would still have war. Hitler looked for the next country, Poland, to take control of Poland. In a calculated move, Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union in 1939. At first glance, this seems strange. Hitler hated the Soviet Union and communist ideology, so why would he do this? The only reason was to invade Poland. The Soviet Union wanted a part of Poland too. In this situation, the interests of the two nations were aligned. On September 1st, 1939, nearly 1 million German troops started moving towards Poland. They planned on attacking from the north and south simultaneously. Other countries were shocked at this. The UK and France were at the edge of their patience. If Hitler continued invading one country after another, their number could be next. They couldn't tolerate it any longer. The UK gave an ultimatum to Hitler. If he went ahead with Poland's invasion, they would declare war against Germany. Hitler ignored the ultimatum, and with this, the UK officially declared war against Germany. After this, France, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Canada declared war on Germany too. At this point in time, World War II hadn't actually begun in full force. This period is known as the Phony War because there was no real fighting yet. Though technically, these countries had declared war on Germany, none of them provided military support to Poland. Poland's army was extremely old-fashioned. Their army still used horses and couldn't last against Germany's military strategy. Neither Britain nor France could save them. Nearly 1.3 million people were mobilized in Poland, but it didn't even take 1 week for the German army to defeat them. On September 8, 1939, 1939, German troops occupied Poland. Here it's important to mention Hitler's revolutionary warfare strategy, known as Blitzkrieg. Using this strategy, Hitler successfully invaded several countries. This military strategy focused on speed and surprise. They used tanks to invade countries so quickly that opponents didn't have time to think. Then their air force, the Luftwaffe, would join from above, and the invasion took place at lightning speed. In German, Blitz means lightning. Hitler focused on making the wars as short as possible, a war that could be wrapped up quickly within less than a week. To maintain this blitzkrieg pace, German soldiers were given drugs. A drug called pervitin was quite common. Today we know it as crystal meth. When this drug is taken, it eliminates fatigue, removes the need for sleep, suppresses hunger and thirst, reduces pain, and gives a confidence boost to the user. Giving such drugs to soldiers proved enormously advantageous. Even if it was extremely harmful to their long-term health, in the short term, it was very useful in winning these wars. The defending soldiers would waste time sleeping at night, while German soldiers could fight day and night and finish the task within 2 to 3 days. As we move forward with the story, you'll see how successful the Blitzkrieg military strategy was for Germany. Back in Poland, not only was the country invaded by Hitler, but the Soviet Union was also invading from the other side. After Poland was defeated, it was partitioned into two. Half went to Nazi Germany and the other half to the Soviets. The logic used by the Soviets was that before the Russian Revolution, the area had actually belonged to them, and so they deserved it. From the Soviets' perspective, there was another country which had been part of the Russian Empire before 1917, Finland. Stalin was worried that Germany would invade Finland. Stalin couldn't really trust Hitler. The worst problem would have been that the city of Leningrad, where Stalin resided, was only 50 kilometers from the Finnish border. Had Finland been actually occupied by Nazi Germany, they would have been too close to Stalin's home. So, without waiting for Hitler to try to occupy Finland, the Soviet Union asked Finland to hand over their territory. Obviously, Finland refused, and so the Soviets launched military action. The Soviet Union's army was much larger than Finland's, and they had better equipment too. But this war lasted for more than 2 months, and the Soviets couldn't gain much. Finally, in March 1940, this battle was over and the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed. According to this treaty, 11% of Finland's land would be handed over to the Soviet Union. In the meanwhile, Hitler's focus wasn't actually on Finland. He was looking at Norway and Denmark. In April 1940, Hitler prepared his plans on how he could establish control over Norway and Denmark. On April 9, 1940, Hitler used his Blitzkrieg strategy to invade both countries. This invasion didn't last long either. Both were small countries. How could they compete against the German army? The Norwegian government fled to London and set up a government in exile. In Norway, Hitler established his puppet pro-Nazi government. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain accepted his failure, the failure to protect so many neighbouring countries from the Nazi invasion. Due to this, on May 10, 1940, he resigned from the position of Prime Minister.
I sought an audience of the King this evening and tendered to him my resignation, which His Majesty has been pleased to accept. His Majesty has now entrusted to my friend and colleague, Mr. Winston Churchill, the task of forming a new administration on a national basis.
The seat of the Prime Minister and its responsibilities were handed over to Winston Churchill. On the same day, May 10th, Hitler launched an attack on France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. This was a declaration of an all-out war. Everyone could see that Hitler didn't intend to stop. Remember how France had built the Maginot Line because they were worried that Hitler would attack their country. They had built a wall at the border, and French troops lined the wall to protect their country.
The fate of Holland and Belgium, like that of Poland, Czechoslovakia and Austria, will be decided by the victory of the British Empire.
On the borders of Belgium and Luxembourg, the Allied forces were stationed to protect them. Hitler used his trademark Blitzkrieg strategy, more than 1,000 fighter-bomber airplanes and around 3 million soldiers on the ground. This was known as the Battle of France. The German troops were divided into 3 groups. Group B was to attack the Netherlands and then enter Belgium to fight the Allied forces. Group C was to attack the Maginot Line. And Group A was the master plan. Group C's attack on the Maginot Line was merely a distraction so that Group A could secretly execute the master plan, entering France through the Ardennes forest. This was a vast forest that was believed to be a strong natural fortress by France's military experts. They assumed that the German army would never be able to come through it because it would be too difficult. They didn't expect the German army to invade via this forest. More than 40,000 military vehicles were used by Group A to enter France through this forest. On May 15, 1940, they captured Sedan and started traveling northwards. The British army fighting Group B in Belgium were shocked to see the large force that suddenly attacked them from behind. The soldiers were surrounded by the Nazi army from three sides. They had only one way to escape, through the sea near the port of Dunkirk. What happened in Dunkirk was a historical turning point in World War II. Nearly 400,000 Allied troops were stranded on the beaches of Dunkirk. When using the term Allied, it refers to the British and French armies. The countries fighting Hitler formed a coalition known as the Allies, while the countries fighting in support of Hitler were known as the Axis powers. It was crucial to save the Allied soldiers in time because the Nazi army was moving towards them at great speeds. They had no other way of escape. They could evacuate only through the sea. If this couldn't be done in time, 400,000 troops could be killed there. It would have been a huge setback for Britain and France, and they might have lost their countries forever. Winston Churchill launched Operation Dynamo on May 26, 1940, the biggest evacuation in military history. On land, the German army had reached the beaches and was firing at the troops. The German Air Force was attacking from above. Christopher Nolan's film Dunkirk masterfully depicts the events that took place there. The film focuses on three areas of evacuation. First, the British Royal Air Force's counterattack to protect the British ships coming to evacuate the soldiers. Second, private fishing boats in the English Channel and common civilians who joined in to help. And third, the events that took place on Dunkirk's beat, the soldiers trying to save themselves and helping each other. By June 4, 1940, nearly 350,000 soldiers were successfully evacuated, but the bad news was that most of the military equipment of the Allied forces was used up in this evacuation. Some days later, on June 22, 1940, France surrendered to Hitler. By this point in time, Italy was under the rule of dictator Mussolini. He formed an alliance with Hitler to wage war against France. The alliance of Italy and Germany was known as the Pact of Steel. The two countries declared war against France and Britain on June 10th. By July 1940, the situation was that Hitler had established control over nearly all neighboring countries: Austria, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and France. At this point in time, only three major powers remained: Hitler's Germany, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Germany and the Soviet Union had a peace agreement, so Hitler believed that the Soviets wouldn't attack Germany. He thought that Britain was the only one remaining to fight. You might wonder about America's role. America wasn't involved in World War II yet. America was standing back because after World War I, they weren't interested in interfering with Europe's situation. It was clear that had they stopped fighting at this point in time, Hitler would have been the clear victor. Hitler had a major upper hand. So how did the situation take a dramatic turn, and how could Britain defeat Germany?
We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender!
Let's continue this story in the next part.